Hey, this is Jon Leon Guerrero. Our guest today is Dr. Felicia Bell. Dr. Bell is the director of Troy University's Rosa Parks Museum, which is an active memorial to the life of civil rights icon Rosa Parks and the lessons of the Montgomery bus boycott that brought racial integration to transportation and international attention to civil rights in America and racial and class inequality to societies around the world. Rosa Parks has become a universal symbol of peaceful protest across cultures and within popular culture. You can see her portrait over Joe Rogan's shoulder on every episode of his podcast. And Dr. Bell, in her calling as historian, keeps active custody of the documents of Rosa Parks' arrest that took place in Montgomery, Alabama, right where the museum stands now, and leads the celebration of Rosa Parks' impact on civil rights and humanity. We are grateful to Dr. Bell and to Troy University for celebrating this legacy and preserving this important event in American history and world history. And it is our privilege and our pleasure to present today's guest, Dr. Felicia Bell.
Lions Rock Productions.
This is Jay Moore.
This is Greg Proops.
This is Jordan Harbinger.
This is Dexter from The Offspring.
This is Nathan
This is
East.
Sebastian Younger.
This is Rick Moranis.
This is Stuart Copeland.
This is Mick Gillette.
This is Andy Summers.
Hi, this is Skunk Baxter.
This is Gabby Reese.
This is Rob Bell.
Hey, this is Jon Leon Guerrero.
Hey, and this is Pete A. Turner.
Hi, my name is Dr. Felicia Bell. I'm the director of Troy University's Rosa Parks Museum, and you're listening to The Break It Down Show.
And now, The Break It Down Show with Jon Leon Guerrero and Pete A. Turner.
Yeah, this is great. So I'm looking at Dr. Rich
Back
and
again.
Dr. Felicia, and I'm Pete the Dummy. Once again, which is I like to be. I like to stretch myself out.
You got a doctorate in life, brother.
I do, man.
Absolutely.
I've got a doctorate in being in the field. But this is super cool. So we're in Montgomery, Alabama, Troy University, the Rosa Parks Library and Museum. And, I mean, we know who Rosa Parks is, but tell us more about this location and what your guys' mission is here.
So, well, I'll start with the mission. Our mission is to serve as a platform for scholarly dialogue, civic engagement, and positive social change. And we do that through our educational programs and our traveling exhibitions that come throughout the year and daily with our tours of the museum's permanent exhibit and our children's wing as well. So this site is significant because it is actually the place where Mrs. Parks was arrested. And on December 1st, 1955.
I'm embarrassed to say I did not actually know that.
Yes. This used to be the site of the Empire Theater, which unfortunately was torn down as it fell into disrepair, and then it was just a vacant lot. And then there was a marker, a historical marker on the street that identified the location where she was arrested. So Troy University established a campus in Montgomery, downtown Montgomery, and the administrative building was right across the street from the site. And the chancellor at the time wanted to build initially a memorial to Mrs. Parks, and then that evolved into building a museum in her name. So the Rosa Parks Museum is the only museum in the world named after Mrs. Parks. The only other one is the Rosa Parks Library in Soweto, South Africa.
Wow.
Mrs. Parks inspired Nelson Mandela all those years he was in prison on Robben Island. And so that library is the only other named after her in the world. This site is significant because she was arrested right outside of our building, and we have an historical marker here identifying that. So she worked a normal day on December 1st, and she worked in the basement of the Montgomery Fair Department Store, which was located on Dexter Avenue in Montgomery, Alabama, downtown. And she worked in the basement assisting the tailor. She was a trained seamstress. Mm-hmm. So after work, she walked to the bus station, which was nearby, near the fountain there on Dexter. And so it was very crowded. It was busy. It was Christmas time. And so the buses were crowded, and she decided to wait and not take the first bus that came. So she went to a drugstore locally and purchased a few items, and then came back to the bus stop and caught the next bus. The bus driver was James Blake, and he and Mrs. Parks had an incident previously, and she vowed not to take his bus again. So she didn't realize he was driving when she got on the bus. African Americans, when they boarded buses back then, the segregated buses in Montgomery, they boarded the bus from the front, they paid their fare, got off the bus, then reboarded again from the back of the bus, and filled the bus from the colored section going forward. So Mrs. Parks paid her fare, boarded the bus. She sat in the middle section of the bus, which was ambiguous. Anyone could sit in the middle section. It wasn't colored or it wasn't white.
Right.
So she was seated legally. That's important because most people think she sat in the colored section or the white section, and that she was, So she was actually seated legally. Bus drivers, city bus drivers had policing powers, and they carried firearms.
Wow.
Sometimes those sometimes the firearms went off on the buses. They were like an extension of the Montgomery Police Department. So as she boarded the bus, and it got full pretty quick as she went down Montgomery Street. By the time she got to the Empire Theater, the bus had filled, and there was a white male passenger standing in the aisle. And he asked everyone on her row, the African Americans on her row, he did not ask them. He demanded that they give up their seats. So 2 or 3 other passengers did get up and relinquish their seats. Mrs. Parks remained seated. And then he demanded again, and she refused by saying simply no. Then the bus driver proceeded to call the police department. They arrived, sirens blaring for whatever reason. Right. And so then they removed her from the bus without incident. So it's important for people to remember that she was seated legally. Yes, Blake had policing powers, but it was not city ordinance for anyone to give up their seat for anyone. Mm-hmm. So that, in that way, he was outside of his parameters as a police officer.
Who was the gentleman that wanted the seat? Do we know, or is that lost to history?
I don't know.
Yeah.
And not that he wanted the seat, but that he was standing.
Yeah.
And James Blake wanted him to have a seat.
I see. Okay.
So my point I was getting to is that was a personal decision that Blake made.
Right.
See, racism is very personal, something on the inside.
Right.
Right? And that's what we like to talk to our visitors about. Yeah.
Someone was just being rude.
It was a personal decision he made. So it had nothing to do with the law. It had nothing to do with his police powers. It was a personal decision.
And he was making a statement.
And he was right in exercising white privilege and enforcing white supremacy through the segregation laws.
Yep. It's hard to think of anything to say, isn't it?
It is shocking. Why this moment? Like, why? Not for Rosa, but for us. Why does this, like, why are we still stuck with the different things that we're stuck with? Like Amelia Earhart. We can't get rid of her. Been dead for 70, 80 years now.
Yeah.
Why this moment? What was it? Was it really the straw, or was it just...
I think now there were several women who were arrested before Mrs. Parks,
right,
who were actually named on the court case that actually resolved everything, but after the boycott. But, and Mrs. Parks was not named on the case, but she was definitely the catalyst, I think, because she was an upstanding citizen. She was employed. She was married. She was not only church going, but she had a position as a deaconess in the AME church, which was the highest level a lay woman could have. Right. She didn't have a college degree. Yeah. She, her and her husband worked, and he was a barber. She was a seamstress. They weren't wealthy people. They were ordinary people who did something extraordinary. And I think that's something people can attach to in terms of, we're all ordinary people, right? So we can all stand up for something when we see something's not right. The other thing, I just think, if you think back to that day and that moment, it's important to also think about the context. No one else on that bus helped her. No one said, hey, what are you doing? You know, now you have to put that in context, because back then black men could have been lynched for things like that. Mrs. Parks lost her job, by the way, as a result of the protest. Lord. So, you know, it just putting things in context. It was a time where Black folks were just so restricted in movement and navigating these public spaces. And so it was challenging all the way around, in a system meant to oppress and humiliate. So I think we sort of empathize with her. She did something very simple. And I think that she was just sort of the catalyst for, you know, you're right, the straw that broke the camel's back. Like, everybody was just fed up with it. And when word got out that Mrs. Parks was arrested, the Black community was like, I can't believe it. Mrs. Parks, everybody knew she was such a good lady, you know, and couldn't believe that. So that's when they were like, no, we got to do something. Yeah.
That answers that question.
Yeah.
Sure, because it's beyond like this person saying enough's enough and doing it in the classy way that she did.
Right.
Like,
that's important.
How can this be?
Yeah.
No, okay.
Because some of the previous arrests involved physical altercations with the police.
Sure.
And so that's another reason that her arrest was very clean, so to speak. There were no physical altercations.
You're a historian.
I am.
Right. And I mean, I'm trained as a political scientist.
Okay.
And one of the smartest
We're
things.
cousins.
Yeah, I know. One of the smartest things that a professor told me once is that, you know, the best political scientists are historians.
Oh, yes.
And so you're right. We are cousins.
Yes.
But in my discipline, many in my discipline realize that if we don't understand the historical context, and we're just taking a snapshot in time often when we do our work.
Yeah.
So we often rely on historians to help us understand the context. And the history matters, but what can that history of the Rosa Parks story in that context, what can that teach us right now, now? Or what lessons? I mean, I just saw a group of children come in here.
Right.
You know, and I know part of the mission is to reaching out to children in the education mission. I mean, we're both educators, so you know, education's one thing, but that education component, what do we need to know right now?
Yeah. I'm seeing young people more and more getting involved with the civil rights movement. Never ended. I think it's still going, you know.
Yeah.
We're in a civil rights movement today, you know. I think what I'm seeing is young people standing up against gun violence. Their world is literally being attacked and turned upside down by gun violence. They're having to survive school, which is unbelievable when you say it out loud. Their world is being directly impacted by a similar oppressive system of gun laws that are putting guns in the wrong hands of folks and not using common sense laws. So they're having to fight against a system as well. And I just think I'm seeing them being inspired by this nonviolent resistance from the 60s. We're seeing them counter gun violence with civil disobedience, with marching and nonviolent protests. So I think they're inspired by Mrs. Parks and others who boycotted and marched. And
you went straight to gun violence. It does. Yes. It does. You went straight to gun violence, though. I like to remind my peers, when the gun conversation comes up, we often forget the Second Amendment says, doesn't it say something about a well-regulated militia?
It does not guarantee anybody the right to own a weapon, a firearm. So, you know, and I think things get misconstrued, you know, and also I think that we have to look at our judicial branch and law enforcement as well, that put these laws, and the legislative branch that put these laws into place and then enforce them, you know. So a lot of what was happening back then in Mrs. Parks' time, these were laws on the books.
These were policy decisions.
Policy decisions, right? So it really is important that, and then they were trying to counter that with voting. And then that resulted in violence on them, racial terror, all of that.
People trying to vote.
Exactly. So I think what I'm seeing now is young people inspired by that and countering these laws that are affecting their daily lives with protest, with voter registration, with participating directly in politics. And we see that with this new Congress that has come in. These new members are younger, more diverse.
More women?
More women. So I think there's a tide that's turning.
Yeah, the political scientist in me agrees with you.
Good.
and I hope the historian in both of us sees the kind of change that we would like to see.
Some of this history, and history wiggles and moves and everything.
Of course. Mark Twain is accredited with saying that history doesn't repeat itself, but it rhymes. Yes.
And that's exactly what I wanted to bring up, is that some of these people are still alive with us.
Yes.
I'm thinking about Rachel Robinson, because if she's physically able, as Jackie's wife, she'll be out on a baseball field in 2 weeks when they celebrate,
my
him.
goodness. Wow.
Yeah. And that was in 1947.
My goodness.
So Rosa Parks died about 15 years ago.
Mm-hmm.
But we had her for a long time. These people are still alive. The people that knew them, that experienced these moments, are still there. We had Jack Brennan on the show. He was a chief of staff for Richard Nixon, and that put him in the chief of staff peer group, and so lots of advice and everything. And I asked him, I said, right now it's a crazy time. And he's like, Vietnam and the civil rights movement, way worse, way more, anger and violence and everything else. What do you think someone like Rachel or their peers that have been all the way down this road, from not being able to pump gas at a gas station and all these things, to where they're at now? We're never done, but when they look back, this is akin to flight and then being on the moon in 70 years.
Sure. Yeah.
So what do you think the older folks that have done this, the really steep part of the climb, what do you think they think?
Well, I hope that they think that their work was not in vain.
Yeah.
I hope that they were able to gain hope from seeing an African American president elected, and seeing change in some policies, and in terms of the Civil Rights Act and Voting Rights Act. But I hope that they've also passed on their techniques to the younger generation, and that they're not just sitting back and not getting it. I hope that they stay involved in some way. Just because they're older doesn't mean that they should be sitting sitting on their hands and not participating still. Leave something for us to be inspired by and to learn from, and the tools we need to go forward and continue marching for them. Yeah.
One of the biggest moments in our show, we had Drez from Black Sheep. He's a rapper.
Yeah.
And we asked him, and this was right during the midst of Kanye going up on stage and taking the mic from people. And he held him to task, because he's like, Drez has this recurring dream, and I'll shorten the story up, but basically he's a slave escaping from the South, and he's running and running and running. He can hear the dogs. He's running and running. And I'm going to get emotional. I always do, because he opens curtains and there's a mic.
Wow.
What are you going to say?
Wow.
And then he goes, look what Kanye does. Mm-hmm. And because he looks back and he's like, look at all the things that it took to get to this point.
Sure.
And the work's not done.
It's not.
Right. Racism's still
Far
with us.
from done.
Right.
Yeah.
And you went to gun violence and you skipped. You skipped over sexism, homophobia, Islamophobia.
Right.
And you went straight to gun violence.
Well, it's been heavy on my mind lately. Of course, recently with the unfortunate suicides of the survivors of gun violence. That just really touched me. And then not long after I began as a director here at the museum, there was the shooting at Emmanuel AME Church in Charleston,
Yeah, that hurts.
South Carolina, and I had to get up and give remarks in front of cameras at the museum here because Mrs. Parks was a member of the AME Church and active in the church, and so and I broke down. I couldn't get through it. So it's just something that just kind of touches me. And, and we're going to have an exhibition installed in April dealing with that and then hopefully have a discussion about it in the fall. But I see it as, it's not just a hot topic or trending or so. It's real, and it's really affecting so many of us. And before too long, it's going to be like cancer where everybody knows somebody, you know what I mean?
Yeah.
So, we've got to kind of keep it in mind, but certainly those other topics are important as well.
The shooting in that church, I think about Obama singing Amazing Grace.
Yes.
You talk about getting emotional. I'm getting emotional just thinking about that.
Oh, goodness. Yeah. Yeah. We can't take things for granted. So, we have to continue in the struggle. Parks would have wanted us to do that, I think, because she and all those people who walked for 382 days and carpooled and, they didn't do that for nothing. Yeah. So we can't let them down.
That's that Mike moment.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah.
Yeah, it's such a heavy topic all of a sudden.
Yeah.
Let's see if I can lighten it up a
Sure.
little bit. When I do research about civil rights, I'm always shocked that there's really just one place where this topic is really talked about and written about, and it can in literature. Yes, there's apartheid, but it's a different thing. It's not the same struggle. Yet there's places that have wild diversity and grinding racism in other places. Are we exceptional in that we've had this movement that continues to move, or do they just call it something else somewhere else? Or I don't have a sense for that.
I think that in some ways the United States is exceptional because we've, other places you have, maybe not so much anymore, but homogenous populations. And we're just sort of this so-called melting pot, right? And our history in this country, I think, was founded on this system of oppression of the institution of slavery, and so it I think has an ongoing effect on the continuum, the story Sure. of the great experiment, right? That was democracy. So I think it's sort of this evolving thing, and so we do have our unique circumstances and our unique issues that we deal with here in this country related to socio-cultural issues and racism as well and diversity. And so, but other countries do. And I think that is because of migrations and how, because of violence and war, you have populations moving into places where they are now going to be on the margins and minorities. So you have folks in Africa moving to Europe. I was in Italy a couple of years ago, and there were migrants there, and they were discriminated upon, or they not treated nicely. So you have, but that's everywhere overseas. Right. You have, I think, a lot of migration happening, and folks going into
like all the trouble in
new
Syria.
areas. Absolutely,
When you take Syria geographically and you look like Rome to Raqqa, it's maybe 1,000 miles. Here to Kansas.
Right.
And if that was going on in Kansas, we'd lose our mind. We'd
Sure.
embrace those people, and we would find, it's crazy that happens. I'm always struggle with the concept of, we have the great benefit of being a melting pot, being not only diverse in religion and everything, but ethnicity and cultures, and that's great. But diversity is the antithesis or the antonym for unity, right? So a place like Denmark, where it's 93% or whatever, Danes.
Sure.
It's maybe easier to make changes because you all kind of agree on something. But we can't agree on anything. But we also have great leaps that we're able to get to because, when we do all agree en masse, good grief, watch out.
Right.
Why is that?
Like I said, I think we're from so many different backgrounds. This is America's a unique country. We're not, it's like you just said, and everybody's 90% Dane.
Yeah.
In the Netherlands, and then here there's not 90% anything. No. Everybody's,
Yeah, the majority's a minority.
Yeah, it's
which
getting
is
to be, right?
crazy.
Yeah. So, and with that comes different religious backgrounds, different cultural backgrounds and practices.
And it's never really been easy for any population.
That's right.
Though.
Yeah.
We gave the Irish people a hard time.
Sure. Catholics, Jews,
exactly.
everybody. So,
and a lot of these populations, or some of these populations, are still having trouble. It's not necessarily that they're having trouble integrating. It's maybe we haven't integrated them. I always like to try to look at it from the other person's perspective. Are they failing to integrate, or are we failing to integrate them?
But some of these groups ended up latching on to what would give them the most benefit, right? In terms of what ethnic group or what group would help them the most. So then the Irish became white, right? And the
they used
Jews
to not be
became
white.
Yeah, you know what I mean? So that happened as well. Unfortunately, people of color didn't necessarily have that advantage. So,
and even those terms are confusing because I have friends that talk about white privilege, and I'm like, you have to define terms. What's white? Because there's Turkish people that will tell you, I'm white. And you're like, no, you're not. But maybe you are. And then people of color will someone can identify, I'm a person of color. No, we know you're white. No, I'm a person of color. I don't know what to. I want to be cool with everybody, but it's hard to keep up with who we are.
Yep. Well,
even our diversity is a pot.
Sure. Well, let people define themselves.
Right. And I make a joke about this, and I'm not trying to take this on a tangent, but I'm like, I like to identify as a 6-foot Puerto Rican with a great arm, a 6-pack ab, and $1 million bank account. That's not true, but because at some point there is a thing you bump up against reality.
Sure.
And it's gotta knock you back in.
Yeah.
And if you want me to participate, I have to understand some of the rules, and so I struggle with that. I want to give everybody a free shot. I don't care who you love or how you love, all that stuff, but. Don't get mad at me as things change so fast. I struggle with that.
Yeah. Well, stick with love.
Oh, I like
be
love.
Okay.
I like love and I like wonder.
There you
Joy.
go. Okay. Good.
I had something. I just lost it.
You were getting ready to say something.
I know, but you started talking about love, so I kind of put me on my heels.
Here at the museum, we try to also sort of what I like to say, get Mrs. Parks off the bus and think of her a little more in context of her lifetime of activism. And so she, even before her arrest in the 40s, she was field secretary for the NAACP. And in that capacity, she advocated for women who were victims of sexual assault. So particularly everybody, since Oprah Winfrey mentioned it at the Globe Awards, Miss Reese Taylor, people are keen on that story. It's a black woman who was raped by 6 white males in, I believe, 44 or 45, somewhere around that time. And so Mrs. Parks actually went to meet with her afterward and took notes and then petitioned the governor for the assailants to make sure they go to trial. And, because it was a time when these individuals who were perpetrating these crimes on black women were just being let go, not even having a trial or these kind of things. So
this episode of the Break It Down Show is brought to you by Lions Rock Productions.
That's us.
We publish, evaluate, and develop podcasts just like this one, consult others to build their own, and create associated content and content marketing strategies.
So if you're launching or expanding your social media presence, your business or your personal brand, or if you just want to take your media presence to the next level,
reach out to us on Twitter
at P. Turner
or at JohnLG69
at the Break It Down Show.
There's 1,000 ways to get a hold of us.
Now enjoy the show.
let go, not even having a trial or these kind of things. So she was involved in that. Her and her husband Raymond were also advocates for the Scottsboro Boys, which was also in the 40s before her arrest. Then after her arrest, once she moved on to Detroit, she was involved with the anti-apartheid movement, protesting that apartheid, and also she was on the board of Planned Parenthood, advocating for women's reproductive rights. So she was an activist her whole life. And I think we can all be inspired by that as well. Like, just because that one incident happened on that day at that time, you can always find ways in which to better your community, uplift people, whenever you see things that are not right, you know, and certainly age has nothing to do with that. And people like to think she was old and she was tired the day she was arrested. She was only like 43, 42, 43. I'm 44, so she was not old. You know, she was not tired. She didn't plan to be arrested. She was trained at the Highlander Folk School in Tennessee, and that summer before she was arrested. And at Highlander, originally Highlander was there to train workers, to be a part of a union, you know, so like, then once the civil rights movement started, they started training activists on nonviolent civil disobedience. And so she was trained there. So when she was arrested, she already knew how to respond in peaceful protests. Yeah.
Do we know anything through the historical record, letters, any of those kind of things? Was she building to this point? Has she revealed this to anybody, saying, I'm just about fed up?
No, remember I told you it was a busy evening. She got on the bus. She was thinking about Raymond and getting home to him. Christmas. She was thinking about Christmas shopping. Yeah. You should read Jean Theo Harris's book, The Rebellious Life of Rosa Parks. It's very detailed. I would say definitive biography of Mrs. Parks. And so it was just an ordinary day, and she was trying to get home. That's all, you know, like every other working person. So that's why, another reason, I just think we can all identify with her, you know? Yeah. Yeah.
That's why she can become a spark, because she can be any of us.
Sure.
Yeah.
And I think that's why the protesters, I think that's why they were caught that spark, because they realized she's just like us. She was catching the bus. She works every day just like we do. Most of the women, the black women who rode the buses, a lot of them were domestic workers. Sure. And had to take the buses to get to the houses they cleaned. Right. You know, so these were.
And why the hell is a guy on a bus? You know, like, just drive the damn bus.
You know?
You know?
Yeah, these bus drivers were pretty nasty. Like, there are some accounts where they were speed and then they would slam on brakes so people could fall. Yeah. Yelling at babies and these kind of things. Very harassing.
To be fair, I love to yell at babies. It's my favorite thing to do.
So, you know, it was a pretty rough time on these buses. Yeah.
Is racism an archetype? Like, is it just how we're made and we have to personally evolve past it? Because I know, like, it's easy to give in to, like, an emotional response, but for me, I have to go, that's whatever that response is, whether it's PTSD based, and I'm like, there's danger here, and there's really not. But is that what it is, or is this something that I know that we talk about racism being taught, but it seems like it's always been around. We've always got into groups and then not like the other group. Like, even in an institution, like, everybody over at HR, they're lazy and they're dumb and they don't do their, like, it's not racism, but it's the same.
Tribalism.
Yeah, exactly.
But that's part of our nature. You know, I'm convinced, and you may disagree, you may agree, but I'm convinced we can learn our way out of that. Yeah. You know, it might be a natural impulse, but you can learn your way out of that impulse. We do have a need almost to define the other. Right. And it often is based on a threat or perception of threat. Sure. Yeah. You know, that's why I think the education component here is so vital, and it's so important, and the civic engagement component. Yeah. You know? Yeah. Sorry. That wasn't my question. That was your question.
Well, you know, I do think that there is, you know, I understand what you're saying, but that doesn't discount racism. It is something that's real.
Right. I'm not saying that it's not real.
Yeah, sure.
I'm just, you know, it's very tough to deal with because it requires a lot of self-accountability, but also external accountability. If someone smacks him in the back, the bus driver in the back of that, hey, knock that off. But we struggle with that.
Right.
'Cause you got to start with yourself, I think, first.
I mean, Felicia just said it earlier.
Yeah.
It's a personal thing.
Yeah.
It's a personal
It
choice
is.
you make.
It is.
And then it becomes a group norm.
Yeah.
And then it gets ugly.
Yeah.
Because that's when the power comes in.
It's a learned behavior, and it has to do with, I think you said it before, your own insecurities and feelings of inferiority and need to assert some kind of superiority. So I think it has a lot to do with that as well.
One question for me then. What do we need to know about this place that we're not talking about now?
Yeah.
It's such a short time. I can't ask you all the perfect questions.
Well, this has been a wonderful conversation. It's very refreshing. I think one thing you should know, several things about the Rosa Parks Museum. We have educational programming throughout the year. Everything we do is themed around some way connected to Mrs. Parks. So whether that has to do with nonviolence or entrepreneurship or leadership or women or politics, education. So all of these things, children, Mrs. Parks loved children. So everything we do is some way connected to her, and that is intentional. So that this museum is a living memorial to her. So that's why all of our programming is thematic in that way. We do things throughout the year. Folks can follow us on social media, Facebook, Instagram, and Twitter, keep up with what we're doing. We celebrate her. We have a huge birthday party for her every February 4th. We have now the state of Alabama has passed Rosa Parks Day. So we celebrate that on December 1st, the day she was arrested. We had a huge celebration here that day and free admission on those days. We celebrate Black culture with Juneteenth that we do every year. This year it'll be June 22nd. We celebrate African American freedom in this country. Like I said, everything we do is around her. Yeah. So that visitors are always engaged, and we like to challenge our visitors to think critically about Mrs. Parks and about racism and about social justice and their role in these things.
Challenge people to think critically.
Yeah.
Can I use that?
Absolutely.
I'm going to use that.
Yeah.
I'll give you a citation every time I use it.
Sure.
I like that.
Yeah.
Well, thank you so much, Felicia. It was really
it's my
great.
pleasure. Thank you for
such a
visiting
treat.
us. Thank you.